Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first event in our Windrush Next Struggle for Justice series, which is in memory of Paulette Wilson and supported by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. In this first event, we are collaborating with Patrick Vernon OBE to hear more about his journey as an activist, to hear more about the Windrush Scandal and his campaigns to support people affected by the Windrush Scandal, and to hear more about how activism is part of his journey, be part of your journey as well at home. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to introduce this event tonight. I'm Marika Ocker, I'm the Managing Director of Black Cultural Archives, and today we have Patrick Vernon in conversation with Kelly Foster. And our sign language interpreter today, Audrey Simmons. So thank you very much to Audrey. So Kelly Foster is a public historian who works both online and on the road. As an accredited London Blue Badge guide, she uses oral histories and archival research to deliver tours that delve into the social history of London's neighbourhoods, and regularly works with us, Black Cultural Archives, Lambeth Archives, the Museum of London, Black History Walks and London Walks. She's a leading advocate for the open knowledge movement, working with Wikimedia and Creative Commons, and is a founding member of Transmission, which is a collective of archivists and historians of African descent. Vernon, our special guest today, is a social commentator, campaigner, and cultural historian. His over 20 years senior experience working across mental health, public health, heritage, and race equality, and he's well known in health, local government, and the voluntary sector. In 2018, he kick-started the campaign for an amnesty for the Windrush generation. Patrick is currently Associate Director for Connected Communities at the Centre for Ageing Better, Equality and Diversity Advisor to Lambeth Council, Chair of Citizens Partnership for Healthcare Investigation Branch, and Senior Associate at Olmec. Patrick is a patron of ACCI, a long-established Black mental health charity in Wolverhampton, and patron of Sante social enterprise in Camden, which supports and befriends refugees and asylum seekers across London. He's a vice chair of the Bernie Grant Trust and a board member of 38 Degrees. He received an OBE in 2012 for his work in race health. He was awarded an honorary PhD by Wolverhampton University in 2018 for his campaigning and writing on culture, history. In 2019, Patrick received the SMK Lifetime Achievement Award for campaigning, and in 2020, he is in the September issue of Vogue as one of the top activists. So an incredible, incredible lifetime of activism. I will now hand over to Patrick and Kelly, and I trust that you will all have a really interesting and really inspiring evening that makes us all go out and stand up for what's right more. Thanks, everyone. I'll be back a bit later on to help Q&A.
Thank you so much, Marika. And Patrick, it's wonderful to see you. Audrey, wonderful to see you too. And Patrick, I've known for probably almost a couple of decades. I don't really want to go into it too much. But how are you doing this evening, Patrick?
Yeah, I'm fine. It's really great to be part of this program with Black Culture Archives about Windrush and about my experience with activism as well. So it's great to be here.
So I know your career as spanning everything from being a pioneer in digital histories, working with TV, with filmmaking, with publishing, as well as what we're going to touch on, I guess, throughout all of this is the threads of activism and how you've organised and how you've galvanised support, the different methods that you've used and what you've used to keep going, really, at times when things may seem insurmountable. But first of all, I'm going to ask a very obvious question, and that is about your choice of outfit this evening, Patrick.
Okay. So what I'm wearing, I'm a Trekkie. Yes, guys, I admit it, I'm a Trekkie. I'm a 60s baby, so I grew up on Top the Pops and Star Trek and Man from Uncle. If anyone can remember those programs, and the Banana Splits. Now I'm really going back, aren't I? I'm a big fan of Star Trek. And my favourite Star Trek is the original, James T. Kirk and Leonard Nimoy. So I do have the original. Didn't wear it tonight, but I do have the original Captain T-shirt style. This is the next one up, as the budget got bigger, and then I've got all the variety ones, including the one that's worn by Captain Sisko and Deep Space Nine, which is my second favourite Star Trek as part of the franchise.
Wow.
I'm into sci-fi, Afrofuturism, and I think it's important to one of the key things for me around science fiction is, and particularly Afrofuturism, is about trying to create a future based on the historical injustices that we face now. So that's why I think I'm a total optimist, and I like to look ahead and look to the future, and that's why I'm a Trekkie, and etc. And I have a radio show called Museum of Grooves, and my show is actually based on Deep Space Nine space station. So I'm a curator on SSS Sankofa space station in the 24th century, and my job is to preserve Black history and music. So I have played my vinyls, which I still have. I'm very proud of them, and I have various guests on my show talking about looking back in time. So I'm in the future, and I look back in time. So yeah, very sad, but no, it's important. I mean, you have to have a bit of light relief when you campaign and be an activist. So this is part of my light relief.
So you're very much a future historian in that case.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah. So yes. So I mean, if I was doing my show, I'd be saying to you, Kelly, what was it like working as a curator and a blue badge, go around historic buildings in Britain in the 21st century? That's a good question. That would be my lines of inquiry. But we won't do it tonight.
Thank you for sparing me. I think around the time that I first met you, Patrick, you were actually, I think I was first introduced to your work because a friend of mine was involved in a television project that you worked on in 2003, a project called Motherland. Yes. That was a show with the BBC, and Motherland was really one of the first times that I saw DNA analysis being used in the UK to provide some kind of insight to people of African descent, what their family history was, what their genetic background was. And then I became aware of the work that you were doing around family history and genealogy with every generation. Can you talk a little bit about how you got introduced into doing the work around family history for people of African descent?
Yeah, sure. So I've always had a passion for history and heritage, and I've always had an interest in my own family history. So I've done a lot of research work. My parents came from Jamaica, the part of the Windrush generation, and so I've interviewed them quite a few times. I've gone to Jamaica, holidays and stuff like that to do research work, and then I was lucky. And then through that passion and interest around family history, there wasn't anything at all in the UK around about 1999, 2000, around that. So I decided to create a website. I got a Millennium Award around about 2000, and that gave me a very small grant, and I started to develop the idea and the concept of a website called around family history and genealogy called Every Generation, which I launched in 2002 for Black History Month. And one of the drivers for doing that is because at the time I was working as senior director for the NHS, and I volunteered to mentor. I was working in Brent, and I volunteered in a primary school, and I was a mentor for a couple of years. I mentored, young boys Some of them were of mixed race heritage, some of them had Caribbean backgrounds, some of them had African backgrounds. And it didn't really matter if they were from a non-parent family or they had all their parents and grandparents. They didn't know much about their family history. And
Right.
I was interested because I kept thinking all of these young boys always got caught into trouble in school or outside. And my job was mentor, and there was about half a dozen guys that were mentoring. One of them actually is Donald Palmer, who then went on to form the Reach Society. And we used to joke all the time. We called ourselves the One Penny Club because the penny would drop maybe about 20 years later. So without, because if when you're kind of mentoring, the young boys say yeah, but they wouldn't then listen to you, and you hope that the penny would drop at some stage, basically. So, but I was interested in my theory, and I still strongly believe in that. If we don't have an understanding of our family history, where we come from, our roots, then that has an impact on our psychological impact, how we see ourselves, has an impact on the life choices that we make, and the other impact on how confident we are. So even though we like to give the impression that we are confident as people, the confidence obviously goes in the wrong way. I'm supposed to be self-assured about your history, your identity, etc. And these young boys I was mentoring, I went on to mentor teenagers and then guys in the early 20s. It was the same phenomenon. They felt less assured about who they were. They might give the bravado of knowing it all, but actually, when you got to know them, they were very shy, deep down. They were very naive, and they didn't know much. So I thought by having a website and information about how to trace your family tree, case studies of people, information about role models, that would be a starting point. And that's how I started Every Generation. And Every Generation was named after one of my favourite jazz albums, Money Laws, Every Generation, used to be with Earth, Wind and Fire. And the track Every Generation is about a grandfather learning or passing on the knowledge and history to the next generation. And then I had the opportunity to meet some Money Laws who told me about the history of produce that particular track as well. So that was great. He was happy to endorse my site. So that's why I started that. So the whole stuff around family history, obviously, I've done lots of workshops. I did loads of workshops working with museums, archives, community projects up and down the country. And then the Motherland project came along. I was not directly involved in Motherland, but I was invited to the screening of Motherland at White City by the BBC, and I got to know some of the people who were involved in the programme. And what was quite clear, that the programme had a disconnect with lots of people, because a lot of people that went to that show and took their DNA test thought that they would find out their ancestors just like that. But there are problems, and there are still problems with DNA testing internationally, because the international database for people in Africa is small. If we are to trace our ancestors to Africa, you need to have a big enough database to match the mutations in your genes, particularly for X chromosome, the mother side, basically. But and a lot of people didn't have a match because the database is small. And the reason why the database is small in Africa is because not many people, and would you want to give your DNA to some guy in a white coat with all our history of scientific racism and everything else thrown in? And obviously some people won't give their DNA because it's about giving their soul and stuff like that. So that's why the database is always small. So it's going to be always hit and miss for people. I was lucky. I did my DNA test using one of the companies that were featured in the program, and I had a perfect match. It was quite not rare, but it was quite unique.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in how this background in family history has informed the work that you're continuing to do. Especially, I'm especially thinking about the work that you've done in the area of the UK that you grew up in and that you were born into, in the Black Country, as it's called.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the campaigns that you've been involved in with your work in the Midlands?
Okay, so I was born in Wolverhampton. I was born, I said in the 60s, early 60s. My parents came over to Wolverhampton, settled there, raised myself and my 4 sisters, and now there's about 3.5 generations of us in Wolverhampton. And And I mean, in terms of my campaigning, I didn't really get involved in campaigns after I left university. I went to Manchester to study law, actually, and that's quite important as well. So I studied law. I've got 2 law degrees, actually, and I think that's quite important, because I think when you study law, even though I never practiced law in the end, law gives you, number one, a good way of grasping knowledge and information, how to put together your arguments, and how you can look at detail and be an advocate. So I think I've used those skills as studying law to help me in what I'm doing even now, to be quite honest. But in terms of campaigns, I mean, the very first campaign I got involved in Wolverhampton was the murder of a guy called Clinton McIrvin in 1987. It was a couple of years after I left law school, and he was a young black guy about the same age as me. He actually looked like me. He was about the same build. He wore, those very geeky big glasses, which I had a pair. It could have been me. He went to the next clothes shop in Wolverhampton, minded his own business. He got arrested. He got jumped on by 3 police officers. They thought he had a stolen credit card. One officer jumped on his legs. One officer slashed in his stomach. And one officer did an arm lock on his neck. And as he was struggling for his life, guess what he said? "I can't breathe." That was in Wolverhampton in 1987, where a young black man died at the hands of the police. And I got involved in that campaign. And my job, as part of the camp, there was like a big campaign group. I was involved, and my job was, as a kind of fresh person who recently studied law, my job was to try and track down witnesses who saw what happened in the shop, which I did. I actually identified 5 witnesses, but none of them didn't want to come forward. I don't want to go into it right now, but a whole variety of reasons. They didn't want to go forward to give evidence against the police. The police officers got reassigned to another part of the West Midlands Constabulary. The family themselves didn't get justice, and even now they're not received justice whatsoever. So that was the first kind of campaign I got involved in Wolverhampton. But when I was a student in Manchester, I got involved in quite a few campaigns. It was the 80s, so there was a bit of activism. There was student sit-ins. There was the whole stuff around what was happening in Israel and what was happening in South Africa. It was actually a period of activism, and there was a miners' strike, and there was lots of things happening. And I got to know this guy. I lived in the Hume Moss Side area. I got to know this guy called Viraj Mendes, who's from Sri Lanka. He was threatened with deportation, and he was an ex-student, and he said to me, "Can you get involved in my campaign?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So we used to be 3 of us outside Arndale Shopping Centre on a Saturday morning with people signing the petitions to support his campaign. And in many ways, that was my first experience of the hostile environment. It wasn't called a hostile environment then. It was immigration deportation policy, which still happens. So that's part of my experiences. And then more recently, 4 or 5 years ago, I wouldn't call it a campaign. I was involved in in the Black Country. So to let you know, especially those people in London and people, if there's an international cause, the Black Country is a conurbation. I have to break this down, because you Londoners, you always kind of think everything north of Watford is like kind of alien to you. So the Black Country covers a conurbation of a number of industrial towns, such as Dudley, Wolverhampton, parts of West Bromwich, Sandwell, Tipton, Coasley, and that if you look at the classic definition of the Industrial Revolution, that is meant to be part of the country where the Industrial Revolution started. Coal mining, steelworks, the canals. So the historiography is actually, all these working class worked hard, went to the coal mines, all that kind of stuff, produced this. You had inventors and entrepreneurs, and lo and behold, we had the Industrial Revolution. So they launched an initiative called Black Country Day to celebrate the industrial heritage of the Black Country, pork scratchings, steam engines, and all that kind of stuff. They have, as part of they had a schools competition, and a young girl entered the competition. She won, and as part of the design brief, you have to use certain colours. And in the middle of the flag, which they now use, there was a chain motif. And I brought to the attention of the organisers that great that you're organising this Black Country Day, but do you realise that all the chains, manacles and fetters and padlocks that were used to enslave our ancestors on the slave ships to the Middle Passage, on the plantations in the Caribbean and in the Americas, and also in colonial Africa, were made in the Black Country? And it's inappropriate and insensitive to use the chain motif to celebrate part of your industrial history without acknowledging what we suffered as a result of our own math and Holocaust. And then, unfortunately, I got attacked for raising the word slave trade. I got the local newspaper, Activism Star, ran a campaign to basically vilify me, basically saying I was causing divisions, I was being politically correct, I was being racist, I was lying about this. The local MPs and council leaders also attacking me. Basically, they said I should return back my OBE. I mean, that's an issue in itself. I should apologise to everyone in the Black Country for lying and causing so much division. And so the local newspaper gave me a right to reply, and I wrote this article. And I said in my opening article was actually, if you go to Wolverhampton Archives, you will see in the archives adverts for sale in 1780 called, I'm not going to use that word, end collars, selling collars manufactured in the Black Country to enslave our ancestors. What more proof do you want to have around the link between the Industrial Revolution? And to make matters worse, some of these manufacturers had plantations in the Caribbean, so they had plantations. And to make further matters worse, they even got compensation in 1833. So you tell me about the history. So it's still, I don't know great detail about that, but it's part of the campaign, the dialogue, which is still ongoing in Wolverhampton.
This was 5 years ago, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves and our viewers that now in the United Kingdom there is an awakening somewhat to the extent and the legacies and the way that the enslavement of Africans impacted every single part of life in the United Kingdom. It wasn't just about the wealthy absentee slave owners, but it was about the cloth, the metal goods, as you were mentioning, the bullets and the guns that also got manufactured in the UK that enslavers and colonizers used to subjugate and oppress people. And it's interesting for me to reflect on, especially with recent news about the National Trust and Historic England and English Heritage, all these places that heritage organisations that have sites of industrial heritage, like the ones in the Black Country, are now beginning to do a survey to look at these connections that you were pointing out, that you'd been so vilified for pointing out 5 years ago.
Yeah, the one thing I forgot to mention to you, Kelly, is the level of vitriol that was meted against me. I got hate mail through social media and emails, and the Express and Star, I was invited by Wolverhampton City Council to do a talk for Black History Month in the art gallery about the history of the Jamaican community in Wolverhampton. And the Express and Star ran an opinion poll online and said, should Patrick Vernon come to Wolverhampton to do a talk for Black History Month? They were deliberately trying to incite racial hatred, and it was so bad that Wolverhampton Council did a risk assessment, and this is true, by the way, they did a risk assessment, and you know what they did for my talk? They hired a private security firm that was the big burly guy that was a security guard protecting me in case I might get attacked by someone because of the hatred that was used against me. And that was about nearly 4 or 5 years ago when that happened. And this happened. I mean, we know about what's happened to Diane Abbott, who's a good friend of mine, who's been vilified on social media all the time. And this is what happens when you raise issues of race discrimination or anything at all which people hate. You get shouted down in meetings, or shouted down in social media, or even threatened with your life. And I contacted Express Star because they were still running a campaign against me. And I wrote to them and said, if you continue this campaign, do you know what happened to Joe Cox? You carry on, see what happens next. And they backed off. This is part of the challenge when you are an activist and an historian, that you get vilified. They don't want to talk about the facts and figures and data and information. You just get vilified in such a nasty way. And that puts a lot of people actually to the court in many ways. It really does. And so you have to be thick-skinned and good to have good support networks to deal with that.
So what do you do, Patrick? How do you keep on fighting for justice? I mean, we've only touched on a few campaigns that you've been involved in, and we're going to speak about some more. But at times when you are attacked and people do attempt to discredit you, how do you keep going on? How do you keep fighting for justice?
Two simple things. If you know your history, that helps. If only when you don't know it and you get attacked and you think then you're on the back off or agree. And sadly, what happens, that happens to a lot of people. When they do get attacked, they then apologise or they do something just to capitulate. But if you know your facts and you are confident in how you present that, that helps. And secondly, it's having friends, family who are there to be there for you, basically. So that's the way I deal with it. I'm sadly, when this again, I'm a total optimist. So I always think of, well, there's always a way, and you have to keep thinking, well, there's always a way.
I know you've been doing an awful lot of work around Black mental health over the past decade or so. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think the role is of history and self-knowledge is in, making us mentally healthy individuals?
It's funny you mention that because I'm actually working on a book trying to articulate the whole issue of Black identity, mental health, and mental health policy. And so I've worked in mental health. I mean, in terms of people ask me, how you're doing all this campaign stuff? How do you pay your bills? So I've worked in health and social care for many years. It's a weird thing because I've had to balance my career in terms of working at senior level, whether it's in the voluntary sector or in the public sector, whilst at the same time being an activist. And I don't know how many people can balance working in the mainstream and at the same time be an activist. I mean, there's not many people. I mean, either you're a full-time activist and that's it, or you don't do it at all. But I've tried to, I think I've created this hybrid of still influencing the mainstream in the work I do, but still being an activist. So I mean, I think I'm in a kind of weird and unique space to do that, where hopefully the community can still see I'm true to my roots, but also I'm engaging the mainstream who want to listen and still want to have that engagement with me. So it's a real balance act. So in terms of the work around mental health in particular, most of the work I've done around mental health, that's not something so much as an activist. It's mainly been more about working in key strategic jobs and using my experiences of activism in that mainstream way, basically. Oh. So I worked my first major job around mental health. I worked for Mind. I was there for about 5 years. I was regional director for London and South East England. I had responsibility for about 88 local mind groups covering all of London, down to North Anglia, East Anglia, down to Kent, Sussex. So I was on the road all the time. And this was in the 90s. And this was a time when the care in the community was being implemented. And this was also the time when a lot of Black men, in particular, weren't getting the right support around their mental health needs. And that led, unfortunately, to a number of people committing suicide, as well as a number of deaths, a long number of murders where people killed people in the community. And the same way that we have these stories now about knife and gun crime, 20 years ago, it was really about people who had mental health problems without the right support, who either harmed themselves or were harming the public. So it was a very toxic environment when I was working on my time, because we were trying to advocate for the rights of people with mental health problems. And that's a civil rights charity with launched various campaigns, and then chief exec gave me the responsibility on top of my day job to manage one campaign called Creating Accepted Communities. And that campaign was really good for me because I learned all about campaigning in terms of all the tools and mechanisms of a national charity where you work with a press team, you have a budget to commission research work, you have access to key movers and shakers to put your case across and to influence government. So I learned quite a lot through that campaign work. And you probably know Lincoln Crawford, black barrister and part-time judge. He passed away recently. He was actually chair. I recruited Lincoln, and he was chair of the inquiry that we launched, looking at social exclusion and mental health. We call it Creating Accepted Community. So sad loss. He's passed away. I learned quite a lot from Lincoln as a one of the very few successful black barristers. Then I'm talking about 20 years ago. Then basically, but also through that work of working, I've done other jobs. I was chief executive of the Afri Trust. Did a lot of work around mental health. I've sat on boards of mental health trusts and health authorities as a non-executive director, raising issues around mental health. And then I've worked closely with activists, particularly like Marcia Rigg. I worked in Lambeth as director of Black 5. And so I've worked in all my work around mental health has been in formal roles as directors, senior managers, or non-exec directors, and around that. And one of the key issues, I think the key thing is there's a link between the work around history and heritage and mental health well-being. And sadly, in 2020, we still can't convince the NHS and central government that the relationship between positive mental health and well-being can be linked to having an understanding of our heritage, our culture, family history, and external identity, basically. It's difficult to make that case. It's never been valued and recognised. In America, it's a bit better. I was lucky. I was a Winston Churchill Fellow. I went to USA and to Jamaica and Barbados about this time last year, actually, trying to find out the evidence base from those countries around positive mental health, black identity, black culture, etc. And more work needs to be done on that. And I know that the BCA, I've had conversations with the RICE, and I know that they are interested in that. And I think we need to do more work around that because it has an impact on therapeutic interventions. It's not just simply about art therapy or culture or social prescribing using a bit of black history. It's actually a bit more than that. So in my book, I'm working on trying to make the case between those relationships and why it's still important. Currently, we still have a disconnect between black culture, identity, and therapeutic interventions around mental well-being, basically.
Thank you, Patrick. One of the things that really touched a note for me is you mentioned changing opinions in the mainstream or influencing the mainstream. And one of the things that a lot of people listening will be familiar with your name about or familiar with your name from, is seeing your name on petitions, because you use petitions quite often to what I would interpret as influence the mainstream. Can you tell us about how and why you use petitions and occasions that you have used online petitions?
Yeah, I've used quite a few petitions over the last decade, maybe even longer. And not all the stuff I do petitions. It's good, if I ask anyone, if you can do a petition, you need to ask a reason why and what do you want to achieve with that. And a petition itself is not enough. It's not often about the signatures on the petition. It's how you use the petition to influence media, journalists, public opinion as well. So it's a kind of art and technique how you use the petition. So I think the very first petition I did was probably back in probably about 2011, 2012. So essentially, I'd made this documentary called Time Life about a dear friend of mine, Eddie Martin Noble, who's a Windrush. Well, he didn't seem to have the Windrush, but he served in the second. Came from Jamaica, served in the RAF, voted to Sam King, But the difference was he stayed in Britain, whereas most Sam King and others went back to the Caribbean and came on the Windrush ship. Eddie stayed in Britain, and he had various jobs. So he actually ran his own businesses until he retired, and he wrote his memoirs called Jamaican Airman. Which actually was edited by Gus John, actually, when he was in the Beacon Books. I made this documentary about Eddie when he passed away. I was lucky because, again, going back to the question you were asking before about history and heritage, I interviewed Eddie with a close friend of mine. We filmed. He talked about his life with hours and hours of film footage, and he passed away some years later. And then, with the permission of the family, I made this documentary celebrating his life, using film archives from the Pearl War Museum, etc. And through that, when I launched the film, which was in 2008, it was around about the 60th anniversary of the Empire Windrush ship docking at Tilbury. And guess what happened in 2008?
In 2008? I'm not sure what happened.
Nothing. In the sense that there was no proper recognition of Windrush. In 1998, around the 50th anniversary, and that's around about the time when Arthur Torrington and Sam King launched the Windrush Foundation, they lobbied to do something around the 50th anniversary. So you had the 4-part series done by Michael Phillips on TV, their book. There was like concerts. There was a lot of stuff around the 50th anniversary. When it came to the 60th anniversary, nothing at all. Nothing, not even mentioned in the news. Nothing. So I wrote an article in the Guardian saying that we should have a National Windrush Day, and that led to the campaign for National Windrush Day, which I started. And I did a petition. I didn't get many people signed it. Probably about 1,200 people signed it. So I realised that, and actually I did about 3 petitions in the end, which all eventually contributed to the pressure, along with obviously the hostile environment, along with the scandal, which obviously was a key factor that influenced the government agreeing to Windrush Day, as we know. So, but yeah, that was my first petition. I've done loads and loads of petitions. One petition, I remember when I did 100 Great Black Britons campaign, that wasn't a petition, that was a website. So there was no petition linked with that. But when, in 2013, when Michael Gove was Secretary of State for Education, he wanted to remove Mary Seacole of the national curriculum, along with a load of Equiana, along with suffragettes, basically. Well, I worked closely with the Mary Seacole Trust, who was still raising money for the statue for Mary Seacole, and I worked very closely with Simon Willick at Operation Blackboat, and also Rob Barclay, he was Chief Executive of the Running Trust, and we all worked together and we launched a petition to say, stop, don't remove Mary Seacole from the national curriculum.
So it's worth saying Mary Seacole was a contemporary of the well-known nurse Florence Nightingale, who was a nurse in the Crimean War. Mary Seacole had come from Jamaica to nurse the British soldiers on the front in the Crimean War, and was much well loved by the British soldiers, this Jamaican nurse and entrepreneur. And had, by the 1990s, I think she had very much fallen out of memory somewhat, and her memory began to become more and more revived. I guess culminating most recently with the unveiling of the monumental statue to her in the grounds of St Thomas's Hospital, just on the south side of the River Thames by Westminster Bridge. But really, I think your campaign, 100 Black Britons, which was this website in 2002, is that right?
Yeah, 2003 actually.
2003, almost 20 years ago, was, I think, one of the reasons why Mary Seacole is very much remembered as a national figure today. I think that for me, very much that was a turning point that went from Mary Seacole being written about in Black history pamphlets and circulated amongst Black people who were interested in Victorian history, to her name being known by school children all around the country. What role do you think the 100 Black Britons had, not only in shaping, as we've spoken about, mainstream opinion, but also shaping Black history online and what we have access to around Black British history online?
Okay, that's an interesting point. If we talk about online, so if you look at the period of 1999 up to about 2010, there weren't that many black websites on Black British history. You had you had some websites. I mean, BlackNet's been around for ages. I feel like BlackNet must be one of the longest, still one of the longest websites. You had Kofi, the director of Kofi Radio. He had a website, and that was quite successful back in the day. And there's Black Chronicles. I mean, there were the Black Presence. There were a number of websites. So I launched my Every Generation website in 2002, and in 2003 I launched a campaign for 100 Black Britons as a website. And actually, that's still going. That website, 100 Black Britons, 18 years on, it's still going. I've been hacked so many times, been attacked so many times, but it's still there. It's still there. The online
18 years is a long time in internet years.
Yeah, it is. It's an archive. I mean, I've kept the original website. I've got a new website for the new campaign, but I've kept the old website because I think it's important to have that. It's archive material now, so I've just made sure it's still online. People can still access it, etc. But I think the campaign itself was. I didn't know. Well, to be quite honest, I didn't know the campaign would be successful. I did it. The reason why I did the campaign, as you know, it was in response to the BBC. The BBC did 100 Great Britons, the Great British Public, and the BBC spent millions of pounds, by the way, in having this massive campaign which lasted about 15 months, from 2002 to 2003. And when they announced the results of Winston Churchill being the greatest the greatest Briton of all time, a lot of people, so the Great British Public Forum, and that's nice one. But a lot of people complained. I know we're members of BASA. And there was lots of debates on the BASA website, the Black and Asian Self-Defence website. There was lots of, saying, here we go again, But also, a lot of people complain, a lot of feminists complain, a lot of Welsh people complain, everyone complained because it just reinforced the same old stereotype. And the thing about it, on the official BBC 100 list, there was the only person of any ethnic description was Freddie Mercury, lead singer of Queen. Of Farsi parents born in Zanzibar, but most people saw Freddie Mercury and probably think he was white anyway. So so essentially there was no visible person of colour on the. So I did a counter campaign celebrating Black British history, and the public voted for Mary Seacole, and it was really fantastic because it did two things, and the Mary Seacole Trust was emerging and was launched, and that helped them in their fundraising efforts. Mary Seacole was included for the first time in national curriculum in 2007, and more importantly, the website, which I mean, there was nothing original at what I did. All I did was working with a team of the web designers and also a good friend of mine, Dr. Angelina Osborne, who did the research work. We just simply present, and we got advice from Newman Jack and Stephen Bourne, and other people. I got advice from them. But essentially, what we did wasn't new. It was all just do was we presented information in a very accessible way. I mean, the website now is really outdated, but at the time when we launched the website, it looked like business. At the time, and we had support from the GLA. Particularly Lee Jackson, Ken Livingstone, and Roger Root. They supported the campaign, so that was important as well. And the website itself, it became. I mean, 100 Great Black Britain is no longer a website. It's could it be? Is it a brand? Is it an institution? I don't know what you call it.
Well, is it a brand? Because this is a useful opportunity to talk about the kind of latest iteration of the 100 Black Britons project, which is a book project. So do you want to tell the viewers something about that?
I'll touch on it very briefly, but I don't want to go into great detail because I want to talk about the book, and particularly my colleague Angelina Osborne, who did the bulk of the research work. So we want to talk about that. Maybe if Erika's still listening or there in the background as a controller, MC, we'll come back again and we can talk about the book as well. But in a nutshell, the book, I got approached by Hachette, Duncan Proudfoot, who's the publisher for one of the imprints, Robinson's, and they basically wanted us to do the book. So 17 years in the making. So we've converted it from a website into a coffee table book, over 500 pages, with a new list of 100 Great Black Britons. A good friend of mine, Dave Olusuga, has written forward, and
Thank you.
and yes, that's the old website, by the way. It's newwebsites.co.uk, which, because also we've launched a schools competition which will run till the end of the year. Because again, that's what I did in 2003. One of the key things is about stuff around schools and young people. It's all very well us big people talking about Black history and heritage and all that kind of stuff. We also have to provide that information to young people and to teachers for the next generation. So I did a schools competition in 2003, and I've done a school competition this year, working with support from the trade union, NEU, as well. And so that's quite important. So the book is coming out. It's going to come out on 24th of September. But to let
So
you
next
know,
month.
next month, and you can pre-order it from all good websites, Waterstones, Amazon, and the like. But we're going to launch the official results of 100 Great Black Britons of 2020 beforehand. I can't tell you when, but it'll definitely be before the book comes out, and and hopefully that will be that will provoke a debate, a conversation. And the reason why it was important to do the book, Brexit, Windrush Scandal, and obviously now we wrote the book while in the middle of Black Lives Matter and COVID-19. So I think the book itself hopefully will contribute to not only hopefully a good piece of historical research work, but also using the book to acknowledge our contribution to Britain, and more importantly, to empower us in the kind of vicious environment that we're experiencing of discrimination, structural racism, and we've featured people in the book who have used their privilege as people, as Black people, in their roles. So all will be revealed, and also we received so many nominations. We had a nomination process and a shortlisting process. So I've decided in the book that everyone that was nominated on our website and through social media will be listed on the book, because I think it's not simply about 100. There's tens of thousands of us who are making difference every day.
Yeah.
Obviously, we had to limit it to 100 because it's a brand.
So I'm looking forward to the book launch next month. So yes, please do pre-order it. Pre-orders are very important. Now, as we're starting to wrap up, we've got a few more minutes left, and I noticed that you were featured in this month's edition, or September's edition of British Vogue magazine, which is called Activism Now, and you're credited as being a Windrush campaigner, and that may be how a lot of people who are more familiar with your work recently would be familiar with your name, connection to the Windrush betrayal and the ongoing campaign to get justice for the victims of the Windrush betrayal that you've been involved in since 2018. Can you tell us, and I was reading Amelia Gentleman's book recently, and she said it was you that connected the hundreds, and you need to correct me on the exact figure, of law-abiding, pensionable aged, mostly people of Black Caribbean descent in this country that were being stripped of their citizenship and threatened with deportation or actually deported. You were the one that connected that scandal, that betrayal, with the Windrush generation. Can you tell us a bit about your involvement with that campaign?
Yes, sure. Yeah. So obviously, in terms of the scandal itself, and it's been decades where people have been treated shoddily by the Home Office, threatened with deportation, being deported, people volunteering to go back to their countries of birth, because before you had the official hostile environment policy that was introduced in 2014 under the Immigration Act at the time. How I got involved. I mean, firstly, I've been involved in the Windrush history anyway, so I've been involved in quite a few projects around celebrating oral history projects, making documentary. Been involved in family history workshops with Windrush generation and children. So I've always immersed myself in that aspect of that. But how I got involved in the actual scandal at the time was I used to be a councillor in Hackney, a Labour councillor for about 8 years, and I stepped down about 2016, sorry, in 2014. So even though I'm no longer a councillor in Hackney, people still approach me, even now, thinking I'm still a local politician with casework or anything at all. And that's part of the role that you have when you're a community activist. You try to signpost people, advise people. Anyway, I got approached regarding some immigration status, and it was through a good friend of mine, Alicia Graham, who runs a radio station called Real Sober Radio in Stoke Newington. And she said, as a friend of hers, her father's been threatened with deportation. Can you help? Can you help in any way? I'm also, I don't know much. I'm not an immigration lawyer, but I do understand aspects of law. Again, going back to my foundation of going to university and studying law, I think that's helped me in good stead over the years. To be quite honest, on reflection. So the person I met, first I met his daughter, Michelle Romero, and then I met her father, Ewaldo Romero. He explained to me his case. About this time, this was around about March 2018, I was already aware of the various cases, aware of the articles that were written by me, the gentleman, The Guardian. She featured Paulette Wilson, who I became, eventually got to know her quite well, and we became good friends and fellow campaigners. She featured Anthony Bryant, Sylvester Rand is not getting cancer treatment, Sarah O'Connor, who I've also got to know quite well. She sadly passed away over a year ago. Similar circumstances to Paulette Wilson passing away recently. So I was aware that there was all these stories that were bubbling in The Guardian between October 2017 up to March 2018. Ewaldo approached me. He showed me his circumstances. He's also been interviewed in Guardian by Amelia. So when I looked at all the various paperwork he gave me, and I was looking at the historiography of immigration policies, and I realised, hold on, all these people that's been affected, they've got one thing in common. Two things in common. Firstly, that all of them were in their 60s, or thereabout, 50s, 60s. Secondly, they all came on a passport of their parents or aunt or uncle, basically. And thirdly, more importantly, none of them, apart from Waldo, was different because he did have a British passport, and that was a trigger for me to run a campaign. All of them didn't travel, so none of them either got a passport to go on holiday or anything at all. They all stayed in the UK, and it's estimated that 30% of people in Britain don't have passports. In America, I think it's as high as 50% don't have passports. And the question you have to ask yourself: do you need to have a passport to prove that you're British? Yes or no?
Well, you do if you're black, apparently.
Well, precisely. On the hostile environment, you do. So if you've got a comparator, two boys, both born in Hackney, in the same hospital, same maternity ward, one's black, one's white. Who is going to be asked to have proof of their identity? And that is the heart of hostile environment policy. The assumption is, if you haven't got documentary evidence and your person of colour, you must be and have to be an illegal immigrant. And most of the people that got caught up in the Windrush Scandal, some of them, there were some people in the 80s that got caught up, but they were the ones that some of them got deported. But the ones that got caught up, the majority of the people that got caught up were the children of the Windrush generation, basically. And actually, they were about my age. I mean, I could have been born in Jamaica, come to Wolverhampton with my parents, but instead I was born in Wolverhampton. So that's the difference between me and them. I was born here, and therefore there's a difference, basically. Whereas they came over, and the assumption was made that they didn't have proof that they were British, even though they were British on the 1948 Nationality Act. So with Ewaldo, he had a passport, And that was a trigger for me. So hold on, if he had a passport and he'd been told that we don't treat as British, and he did have a British passport, and the other people didn't have passports in the first place, I knew that this was a class action targeting the children of the Windrush generation, and the majority were Caribbean, but also a lot of Africans as well. But it seemed to be a lot of Caribbean, not many from India and Pakistan, because the difference was that they became nation states independence in 1947. So therefore, they were independent, whereas majority of the Caribbean countries and African countries were still under colonial rule, and therefore, you're technically speaking, were British, basically. And if you watch David Oliver's series, The Hidden Files, he goes into much greater detail about the whole way that the government operated and Whitehall operated at the time. So I decided, because by that time I'd done so many petitions, I thought, well, I need to do a petition. But I decided to use a UK government website petition. Didn't want to use change.org or any of the petition site. I decided to use the UK government website because that was the official website. If you have 100,000 signatures, then you would automatically trigger a debate in Parliament. So I thought, well, hold on, the Home Office has messed up. We need to take action against government, and I used that site, and it was amazing because when I launched the petition, it took about 3 weeks for it to be approved on the UK government website because they have to do checks and balances. The website, the petition went live during the Easter break, and I started tweeting like hell. I started sharing it with MPs and people who followed me on Twitter to share it, and then it just picked up attraction. And then when it reached 10,000 signatures, it went ballistic. Everyone got involved. Everyone started signing it. The media started covering it in great detail. And then within about 10 days of the petition going live, I automatically got 100,000 signatures for debate in Parliament. And that was before David Lammy did his groundbreaking barnstorming speech, if you can remember, which went viral.
Yeah,
because by that time,
where he said, "We are here because you were there," or words to that effect. I'm probably paraphrasing him very poorly.
No, basically, if you lie down with fleas, then just watch out. So basically, that was a powerful statement. So so really, the petition, and I designed the petition. I had to keep it simple and language. I used the word amnesty, and I know that I did. By the way, I did speak to some lawyers, by the way, and I want to kind of acknowledge one lawyer who I got advice from. Gift the Elder. She used to be the director of legal services at the council, and she'd already retired by then. But I got some advice from her, so that's and that was really helpful. That she gave me advice, and she still gives me advice as well. So but I deliberately used the word amnesty. It was technically incorrect to use the word amnesty because they were already British. But I wanted to evoke an emotional response with the petition with the public. And I think it worked, because if I put down, we want to regulise the status of Windrush generation children, how many people would have said, well, no one would you understood it? And how many people would have signed it? But if you put that amnesty evokes an emotion about something's happened to someone, people's rights have been taken away, or something's been done to people. And in the petition, I had 3 simple demands: automatic status for everyone caught up in a hostile environment. Secondly, compensation for loss and hurt. And thirdly, stop all deportation flights. So those were key demands in the petition. Then I'd worked closely with a good friend of mine, Dr. Penny Mendoka. She is a graphic facilitator, and we had been working together around Windrush Day for a couple of years, and she designed these fantastic graphic images of Windrush Day. And so I asked her to design a graphic image highlighting the key demands in the petition, which I then kind of use as part of the social media campaign on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. And then it was about encouraging people through my networks and encouraging other people to sign the petition as well. So that's why it led to that. And what was interesting, and then I got approached by Windrush Trust and JCWI, because they were advising the Caribbean High Commissioners in London of the Caribbean countries, because they were thinking about taking some legal challenge against the Foreign Commonwealth Office and Home Office, because obviously they'd been receiving cases. And then I met Jacqueline Mackenzie, because she contacted me via Facebook, and she was having concerns about what's happening also. And then I can remember that there was a press conference that took place at, it was originally going to be at the Jamaican High Commission, but location changed. That's another story in itself. And I think it was a Kit's High Commission, and all the CARICOM High Commissioners were there. They invited Amelia Gentleman was there, and that was the first time I met Amelia. We got to know each other quite well. And
so Amelia Gentleman is the Guardian journalist who led the press campaign at the Guardian. They were really quite strident in putting the Windrush betrayal on the front cover for I think 2 weeks. They covered the story.
I think to be fair, the Guardian really pushed this campaign hard. So I mean, I think we have to acknowledge the work of the Guardian, particularly Amelia Gentleman, and in terms of relentlessly kind of raising this, because I think but we have to recognise that if it wasn't for the voices of those men and women who were willing to go public and to talk and to expose their life to the media, and it wasn't, and obviously the Guardian played a key role, but the Sky, ITN, Channel 4, and BBC, all these eventually interviewed loads of people, and then other media got involved. Then when the Daily Mail got involved, that's when it changed. Because up to that point, it was seen as just Guardian readers, but when the Daily Mail got involved and they started to highlight the stories of what was happening, and I know that people criticise Trevor Phillips, that kind of stuff, and I don't agree with all the stuff that Trevor does. But to be fair to Trevor Phillips, because I did contact Trevor Phillips, and I did reach out to Trevor, because I've known him for years. Mm-hmm. He did use his influence in that part of the media where maybe none of us can't reach, and he was able to influence that. So we have to acknowledge that when you're doing a campaign, or any campaign that you do, you have to work with people who can influence. You will have only a limited number of influence or direct access to yourself as an individual or as an organisation. You have to work through other people who have got more direct access, and that's any campaign technique. If you just with most of our campaigns in the community, we campaign amongst ourselves, which is very nice and very important. But if you want to change public opinion, and I've been successful, I think, over the last 10, 15 years on a number of campaigns in influencing, maybe not completely change public opinion, but influencing decision makers and informers, you have to have a broad church in who you can get allies and support with as well. So I think it's important, and sometimes we never reflect on that. And the Windrush Scandal, you have to bear in mind that up to this point, we were leaving Europe. Immigration policy has always been toxic anyway under Labour, Conservative, and Lib Dems. Secondly, most public opinion polls up to the time of the Windrush Scandal, they thought that having tough control immigration was a good thing. The vast majority of people in Britain want that. But for some reason, the Windrush Scandal turned that narrative for a brief moment, when the public, through not just simply my petition, but all the work that a lot of people were doing, for a brief moment in time, said, hold on, we are treating British people from who have got Caribbean heritage, African heritage, in an appalling way. I'm not, that could be my partner, that could be my work colleague.
It could be my granny. I think
my granny. Precisely, my granny. Well, precisely. So people saw that connection with the historiography of the Windrush race, because up to that point, majority of the average person in Britain didn't know what Windrush was, or why we came to Britain in the first place. Why are all these people here? But they got it through the scandal.
I think now might be a good time, because we're wrapping up. We've got a few minutes left. It will be a good time to take some questions from the audience. There's one here. If we can go to Elizabeth. Here we are. A recent question. Yep, no, that's fine. So other than public-facing work, interested to know how you've dealt with accusations of being difficult or angry in personal relations. In that sense, are you still talking to white people about race?
Been difficult, angry in personal. I've never been difficult, angry. I might be forceful. I might be articulate in that. I mean, obviously we have different styles. I mean, we all have different styles of how we influence. Some people go, might be direct, confrontational, and that style is important at times. I've got some of my, good friends and campaigners who that's their approach that works for them. My approach I've always been a diplomat, and a mediator. That's, I believe, in those key principles. So my kind of influence is going to be different from others, and there'll be certain campaigns that I might not be effective because it requires a particular approach. But where there is a campaign where it requires a skill mix that I have, and I've worked in those campaigns which I think add value to my skill mix, then that's what I do. So I'm not one for big confrontations. I'm one for dialogue, engagement. That's not to say that I'll serve up fools gladly. I think the assumption that is made with this kind of perception that to be in a campaigner you have to be shouting at people all the time and demanding and putting your fist down all the time and making powerful oratory speeches all the time. So that's important. I'm not saying that's not important, but the most effective campaigns are the ones you don't know about. It's when you see the result. Working behind the scenes is really, really important. And I think sometimes in the community, we do not appreciate there are a lot of people working behind the scenes. They're not going to make a big fuss and say, here I am, I've done this for you. I mean, I'm lucky I've got a degree of visibility, but actually majority of my work, I would say 70% of my work is working behind the scenes. Yeah, you might see me on TV, you might see a mention of me in the media, a quote, but the majority of the stuff I do is behind the scenes about effecting change. And that's not to say that it's about collusion or anything at all. It's about choosing the best way to influence, as long as you've got clear perspective. So so that's I'd say my response to that.
Thank you. So we've got time for a couple more questions. So please do drop your questions down in the comment section on the YouTube live chat if there's anything that you want to ask. Elizabeth has asked whether the original 100 Black Britons website has been suggested for the National Archives. So how have you archived the digital aspects of the work that you've been doing, what archivists will call born digital material? How are they being archived?
Currently, thanks for that question. I mean, currently, I just meant Denise Little, who designed the original 100 Black Britain website. She's no longer in design work so much because she's a psychotherapist, but as a special favour for me, she looked after the website. I spent a fair amount of money on different platforms to maintain it in terms of web security. So I've spent lots of money over the last 17 years to maintain 100 Black Britain and the old site. Yeah, I mean, I definitely would. I mean, now with the book coming out, I would seriously consider if a national institution wanted to look after the site as an archive of history. I consider. I know there were a number of projects done by the British Library some years ago, and they did approach me.
The British Library houses the UK Web Archive, and they systematically trawl through anything that has a .co.uk, .org.uk URL, and they archive that. So it's worth sort of checking whether every generation has been archived there, and it probably has been archived at the Internet Archive as well, which is a separate web archive platform.
Okay.
But it's very important. I think Elizabeth is making a great point that it's very important that we also think about the way that we communicate online as something, and even the campaigns that we have online. I think thinking about archiving the petitions would be quite an interesting thing. It's not only sort of your website, it's also what are you doing on social media, the petitions and other elements of the campaigns that you do, and all the sort of articles that you may have written for different websites and newspapers over the years. How do we archive all of that as well? It's a really
that's a good. I've just relaunched my own personal website, Patrick Vernon OBE, and I've got lots of stuff on there. But I know that I've written lots of articles for different websites and different blogs over the years, which have some of them have disappeared, or etc. So that's a relevant point, actually. It really is.
I don't think we've got any more questions. In that case, I'm going to use the host prerogative and ask the last question.
Sure.
In reading through the book on the Amelia Gentleman's book on the Windrush betrayal, the foreword is done by, I think, Catherine Viner, who's the editor-in-chief of The Guardian. And she closes by asking, or by saying that justice is in sight at last for the victims of the Windrush betrayal. Do you think that justice is in sight for those who suffered because of the hostile environment policy?
Sadly, no. It's not in sight. Sometimes it feels out of mind, the way this government's operating. So there has been some element. I mean, we have to recognise there have been some achievements. So as a result of the work I've been doing, the work other people have been doing, and organisations, the government have done three things. They created the Windrush Task Force. About 13,000 people have now had their status regularised. That's important. But if you remember, in my original petition, I said it should be automatic status. Why do you still have to go for a derogation and still prove that you're British when we're British in the first place? And the best example I can give you is the government's recent announcement that people in Hong Kong, and there's 3 million, will have automatic status without even proving anything. So why is it that we still have to prove that we're British, and we've got a stronger ties here than? And I'm not decrying that the people of Hong Kong don't deserve that; they should do. But why couldn't at the height of the scandal, when Theresa May made her first apology, around about April 2018, they could have given automatic status to maybe 50,000-60,000 people, just like that. And on top of that, why is it they're still doing these deportation flights? They've had two deportation charter flights. They've deported roughly about just under 50 men who have lost ties with their families, their children, and their ties in the UK. So that part of justice has not been achieved because there are still people who have not come forward and to sort out their status because they don't trust the Home Office. They're not even quite sure of their status. And the government could have done that one fell swoop, say we will automatic status, end of. And that would have had a major impact on justice for the Windrush generation. The second thing that the government did was the compensation scheme. And again, that was one of the key demands in my petition. And I used the word fair for loss unheard, and I did that and that was written on the basis of restorative justice. The compensation scheme that we have currently is based on the personal injuries compensation scheme. It's not based on restorative justice, because if it was based on restorative justice, then people wouldn't have to go through the hoops together, have documented evidence and proof and written proof for the loss they have suffered. So the compensation scheme, I know that Martin Ford's done a lot of work to make it better, but fundamentally the scheme is not working in terms of the desired effect of righting the wrongs. The government's got the audacity to use Black Power civil rights language of righting the wrongs as a gloss when they're not in following that through. And the third part of the kind of justice bit is the bigger issues around the hostile environment and recognition of the impact on, particularly on Caribbean and Black, British and African communities in Britain as a result of this sustained policy for the last several years. And they decided to have the Lessons Learned review, which was done by Wendy Williams. And Wendy did launch her report at the height of lockdown with 30 key recommendations for change in the Home Office. I think a number of us were hoping that she would say that the Home Office was structurally racist, introducing racist, but when I interviewed her for Colour for Radio, she said she didn't look at the whole of the Home Office department, only in relation to the scandal. But I think the Home Office is introducing racist, like the Met Police and most institutions, and you'd think that they would smell the coffee and say, okay, let's try and make the effort to try and redress some of the challenges and weaknesses. There have been lots of written evidence and submissions given by a whole range of individuals and organisations and the Windrushers themselves about how to improve things. The Home Office not even adopted half those measures through the various meetings, dialogues, through all the community groups that I've been involved in and stuff like that. And they have not taken on board that. I mean, and the only reason why they're now agreeing to implement the full lesson learnt review is because I had to do another petition. I've got 150,000 people signed the petition. The late Paulette Wilson, Anthony Bryant, Ewaldo Romeo, Michael Breathwaite, Glenn Caesar, myself, and the Chief Executive of JWI, we went down to number 10, presented that petition, and there was so much media coverage, which was around about the time of Windrush Day, that the government was forced again to admit. I know they've got a cross-party group of people there, and good luck to them, but none of them have not been involved, apart from the BCA, have not been involved in understanding the nuances, what does justice really looks like as well. So going back to your answer, the answer is no. I mean, my current petition, by the way, which nearly 60,000 people have signed, is for the compensation scheme to be removed from the Home Office, because it's quite clear the Home Office is clearly incompetent. They don't have to understand. It's a conflict of interest. It's like asking a perpetrator of violence to have responsibility of implementing a safeguarding policy. There's a massive conflict of interest, and I think the scheme should be removed from the Home Office and managed by arm's length independent agency to restore confidence and trust to the Windrush generation and their children, and so they can get the compensation that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Patrick. And I think that's something for us all to bear in mind. What do you think our role is, the people that are watching this? What's our role in helping to ensure that justice is met? What can we do as individuals?
So there's a couple of things that you could do. Firstly, the petition I mentioned, it's on 38 degrees, and it's called Improved Compensation Scheme. And if I can have up to 100,000 signatures, and the Windrushers we will go down to number 10 again, and maybe we can have more people. Because when we did it, it was just after lockdown, so as lockdown was easing, so we couldn't really have lots of people. But it'd be really fantastic if in September we go down to number 10 with over 100,000 signatures and say to the government, we want the Home Office compensation scheme to be managed by a different agency and to make automatic payments faster and quicker. Only £1 million have been dished out in the last 18 months. This government has given out nearly 20-30 billion pounds because of COVID, and quite rightly around furlough schemes, whole range of stuff. So why have they taken 18 months to give out £1 million, and yet when it comes to COVID-19, they've given billions in the space of months? There is something fundamentally flawed, something fundamentally wrong, and the conclusion is that they don't really want to implement. They don't really want to right the wrongs. They want to give. I use the expression. They want to give a pound shop scheme. We don't deserve a pound shop. We did a scheme of money and compensation. Secondly, as you know, Paulette Wilson, who died just over a month ago now, her funeral's come up quite soon, and we were successful on the GoFundMe. And I have to acknowledge GoFundMe, by the way. GoFundMe, I've worked closely with. It's not just about petitions, by the way. It's about raising money. So I've had quite a few GoFundMe campaigns. I've actually raised money for the funeral costs of 3 Windrushers who have died in Britain as a result of hostile environment: Paulette Wilson, Sarah O'Connor, and Dexter. Surname's gone now. Sorry about that. And so I've done that, and so that's through GoFundMe. I launched the Windrush Justice Fund, where we raised money to fund community groups such as BCA and other community groups to do legal surgeries. And now with Paulette Wilson, we've fantastic response from the public, where we raised money for a funeral cost. But now we want to raise some more money to have a memorial in Wolverhampton to recognise her contribution in fighting for justice for the Windrush generation as well. So if anyone could go onto the Remembering Paulette Wilson, it's on GoFundMe, donation big or small, that'd be really, really appreciated. And I think finally, there are a lot of people out there in the community who still haven't come forward. I know that the BCA are working closely with Jacqueline McKenzie's firm to organise some surgeries. There's also going to be some new surgeries being organised with Claudia Jones' community organisation happening in partnership with a number of law centres. So I think that'll be important as well. And also Detention Action and Movement for Justice. They've been campaigning to extend the definition of Windrush and to stop these deportation flights. So there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of marching to do. There's lots of lobbying to do with MPs, letters to write, petitions to sign, and money to raise. So if you could be involved in any of that, that'd be really fantastic.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I was just about to wrap up, and then our host has appeared.
So I think that event was amazing. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you so much, Audrey. I wanted to just underline what Patrick was saying. There were so many things that you mentioned, Patrick, that I didn't have time to type them and make them appear on the screen.
Okay, right, okay.
This recording is going out live on YouTube, and then will stay on our YouTube channel. So I think what we'll do is collate all of those links and add them to the YouTube description of this event, so people can come back and rewatch the event, but also find all of that information directly beneath the video down there.
Sure.
I think it's important to really recognize the journey that you've been on, Patrick. I mean, it's pretty incredible, the amount of activism, amount of causes, amount of money that's been raised by you, number of petitions that you've started and seen through and delivered to Downing Street, but also the amount of work that you've done behind the scenes. So that is one reason why BCA was really delighted to host this event with you, because actually you don't get in front of the scenes as often as I think you could do, considering the amount of work that you do and the amount of action that you actually make happen, rather than just words, you do actions. So thank you very much, Patrick. I also want to mention that Black Cultural Archives, our home, is at 1 Windrush Square, and we are opening the building again on Thursdays, Fridays and Saturdays. We have a meeting later on this week about restarting the Windrush legal surgeries that Patrick mentioned, and so keep an eye on our website, our newsletter, etc., about when those are going to be restarting those in-person surgeries. Patrick also mentioned that Black Cultural Archives has been invited to be part of the cross-government Windrush working group tasked with making sure that Wendy Williams' Lessons Learned report, the 30 recommendations, are implemented. And I'm pleased to report that actually the Home Office seemed to have very, very quickly kind of taken, regardless of what's happening at policy or government, or above their heads, but the staff of the Home Office seem to have really taken them in, and so there will be an announcement in September from the Home Secretary about the progress that's been made. Also in September, Patrick is collaborating with Black Cultural Archives on a conference event where we'll be really examining what progress has been made on the Lessons Learned review, and also setting Windrush in historical context. So do keep an eye out for that. We'll be announcing the save to date in the next couple of days. That's a lot of housekeeping. I really love the chat in the YouTube. So I was looking to the side at the YouTube chat. It's been a really, some really passionate people have contributed to that chat. So thank you so much to everyone watching for being part of the chat, and thank you for your questions to Patrick. So is there anything that the guests, Kelly, Patrick, would like to, final words before we end our event tonight?
Final words are thank you for organising this event, Black Cultural Archives, and thanks to everybody watching. Patrick, it was wonderful to explore the kind of years that I've known you and the different things that you've been involved in, and even then we didn't touch on everything, so so there still might be some things to come back to. Thank you so much, and I'm so looking forward to the conference that's being organised in September.
Okay, that's been a pleasure, and in good Star Trek fashion, live long and prosper.
Peace and long life. Peace and long life.
I don't know if I could do both hands.
All right, goodbye, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.